can start the recording. Yeah.
I've started, sir.
Okay.
Okay, sir. So, good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be discussing.
Dr. One minute, Dr. Raj.
Yes, sir.
Doctor, after I've been operated, you were supposed to come today on our meeting.
I spoke to him. He is doing.
Amrut Vora,
No, Dr. Vora has not come. Dr. Apte is busy with his physiotherapy, so he will not be joining.
So good afternoon, everyone. Today we'll be discussing something which we use very routinely, but unfortunately we don't have much of in-depth knowledge of how to actually give non-invasive ventilation in patients which are very commonly used in ICU and non-ICU settings. So we'll be talking about non-invasive ventilation, the initiation, titration, and monitoring of it.
Doctor, you have not introduced yourself.
Sorry, sir. My name is Dr. Rishabh Raj. I'm a pulmonologist. I have done DM Pulmonary Medicine and Critical Care from St. John's Hospital, Bangalore. I'm attached at Rane Hospital and I run a pulmonary hypertension clinic here and inpatient pulmonology patients I see, sir.
Thank you very much.
So non-invasive ventilation is the provision of ventilatory support through the patient's upper airway using a mask or a similar device in the form of CPAP, which is continuous positive airway pressure monitoring, airway pressure, or bi-level positive airway pressure, which is the BiPAP. These treatments may be used as a sole treatment, as a holding measure, a trial prior to intubation, or the ceiling of treatment, with the aim to produce mainly these three things. We need to decrease the work of breathing of the patient. We need to increase the tidal volume and decrease the respiratory rate. That is the main goal of initiating non-invasive ventilation in any patient. So for the initiation, what we are going to look at is when, that is the indication, whom not to give, that is the contraindication, what type of NIV which we can give, and what are the settings which we can use, and what is the interface which we can use to provide the pressure given through the NIV. So level A indications, these are the four main indications where you can use non-invasive ventilation, is acute hypercapnic respiratory failure in COPD patients, cardiogenic pulmonary edema, acute respiratory failure in immunocompromised patients, and weaning of COPD patients. So in practice, these are the four indications where you have to use the NIV first and then only think of intubation. All the other indications have a very weak evidence to give NIV in such patients. Like acute severe asthma, this is where things go wrong, where we provide non-invasive ventilations to patients who are asthmatic also. But asthmatic patients don't generally improve with non-invasive ventilation. If they have gone into a very severe state of asthma, they will require intubation and mechanical ventilation. Non-invasive ventilation is not the answer. So acute severe asthma comes into level B. Post-operative respiratory failure, acute hypoxemic respiratory failure, pneumonia in COPD patients per se, we can try NIV. And in patients who have given consent for do not resuscitate and do not intubate, and obstructive sleep apnea, obesity, hypoventilation syndromes. Level C, where we should not use NIV, is ARDS, pneumonia in patients who are not having underlying COPD, cystic fibrosis, and trauma. This is what we need to remember, that ARDS, NIV is not the initial management. You should always intubate the patient and provide positive pressure ventilation to that patient. So the recommendation, as we see here, the main recommendations which we are going to see are the strong recommendations, which are hypercapnia with COPD exacerbation. So the main aim of providing a non-invasive ventilation is to improve the hypercapnia. That is the reason it works in COPD, but it doesn't work in asthma, because asthmatics generally become hypoxic and not hypercapnic. Similarly, cardiogenic pulmonary edema, there's a strong recommendation. That is because we need to drain the interstitial fluid out of the interstitium back into the vessels. Okay. and others mainly are conditional recommendation for use. Now, these group of patients are the patients where you will give NIV for long term. That is obstructive sleep apnea, hypoventilation syndromes, patients with restrictive chest wall disorders, patients with neuromuscular diseases, patients who are COPD, who are stable, who are not in exacerbation, but have a high PCO2 level. There you can give NIV for long term, and palliative care. So these group of patients are the patients who require long-term non-invasive ventilation, whereas these group of patients are the ones which we are talking about where you require acutely. Patient who has just come to your hospital and requires some intervention, then we have to follow these recommendations. So
What about diffuse pulmonary fibrosis?
yes, sir.
Diffuse pulmonary fibrosis. Do they need
Diffuse
long-term
pulmonary fibrosis, sir?
diffuse pulmonary fibrosis?
No, sir. No NIV in pulmonary fibrosis. It's the same thing which happens with asthma. Fibrosis will generally present with hypoxia. Their lungs are only fried up. So providing NIV is not going to improve their tidal volume. It's not going to decrease their rate of breathing. Those patients generally work better if you provide them oxygen at home. And if the lungs becomes more and more fibrous, there is very less which you can offer after a certain point of time.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Thank you.
So the inclusion criteria generally for these patients are patients who are sick but are not moribund. Most important, they should be able to protect their airway. Patients who are unconscious, patients who have respiratory disorders, patients who have bulbar palsy, who cannot protect their airway, NIV is not to be given because they will result in aspiration pneumonia. Okay, patient has to be conscious and cooperative.
741
No excessive respiratory secretion should be there.
1223
Potential for recovery to
169.
qualify for of life acceptable to the patient. Patient's wishes should be considered. What are the exclusion criteria? This is what we should know. Facial burns and trauma. Any facial injury which is not allowing you to keep the mask on, the NIV should not be used. Undrained pneumothorax. That is but obvious for any positive pressure ventilation. If you have a pneumothorax and you have not put a chest drain inside, if you give a positive pressure ventilation, that pneumothorax is going to increase and patient is going to go into a tension pneumothorax. So at that point of time, NIV should be avoided. Patients with fixed upper airway obstruction, which have like a mass which is sitting inside the airways, in the trachea or at the vocal cord, the NIV is not going to help. Patients who are vomiting because they will vomit in the face mask, which they will aspirate again. Again, unconscious, agitated and confused patients. Patients who are unable to protect the airway or have copious secretions which they cannot manage. And hemodynamically unstable patients. So what are the types of NIV which we have? We have a bi-level ventilators and we have critical care ventilators. So what is the difference? Bi-level ventilators are the small portable BiPAP machines which we see at home. It has a single circuit. It has no alarms. You cannot blend the oxygen how it happens in the ventilator. And the newer BiPAP machines have these modes, but generally the time modes, adjustable trigger, cycle and rise time is not there. And they have a better leak compensation. What do you mean by leak compensation? That when we put a mask to the patient, certain amount of air is going to leak from the side of the mask. Now, these ventilators are smart enough to estimate the amount of leak that is going to happen through the side of the mask, and that happens continuously through the side of the mask in every cycle. And they will increase the pressure or increase the flow according to the amount of leak that is happening. So that is better with the bi-level ventilators which you see at home. Now, the critical care ventilators are the ventilators where you give the non-invasive ventilation from a big ventilator, which is used for mechanical ventilation after intubating the patient. So what is the advantage over there is that you can give a precise oxygen. If you give 40%, patient is going to receive 40%. Whereas in bi-level ventilator, you're going to give oxygen through the oxygen cylinder. So that oxygen is variable depending on the patient's breathing effort and the leak which is happening around the mask. But here, a precise oxygen is going to go because there are two circuits in this critical care ventilators instead of a single limb circuit, that is a dual limb circuit. There's less CO2 rebreathing because of the two limbs. It has better alarms and monitoring and better modes for assessing the patient. The modes of NIV, we don't need to go into that much in detail, but we need to know, same as invasive ventilations, we have two modes here, pressure controlled and volume controlled. The difference is when you put a patient on a volume controlled mode, a fixed volume is going to be delivered to the patient, irrespective of what pressure is used.
4-1.
Whereas in pressure control mode, a fixed pressure is going to be delivered, but volume can be variable. Okay. Now coming to the main modes which we don't really look into when we prescribe NIV to a patient. The earlier NIVs, portable BiPAPs and all machines which used to come only with this mode, which is the spontaneous mode. What do you mean by spontaneous mode is that it will only work when the patient is breathing. When the patient stops breathing, this mode is not going to give any breath. This is totally based on patient's respiratory effort. If patient is making an effort, the BiPAP is going to give the pressure. If the patient is not making an effort, the BiPAP is not going to deliver any pressure to the patient. So as we see here, the patient controls the beginning and the end of inspiration. It is totally controlled by the patient. It is like the pressure support mode which we use on a ventilator. The inspiration starts when the ventilator is triggered by the patient, like when patient tries to take a breath, when it creates a negative pressure inside the patient's thorax, the BiPAP is going to give the breath. The pressure is maintained as long as the minimal preset inspiratory pressure, inspiratory flow is occurring. Cycling, what do you mean by cycling? Cycling is the time when patient switches from inspiration to expiration. Now this cycling also depends on the inspiratory flow of the patient. When the patient inspires in, it starts, after inspiring, it starts to expire. At one point of time when the inspiratory flow has decreased to an extent where the ventilator senses that, okay, now we can stop giving the pressure, the ventilator will stop giving the pressure and patient will be able to expire completely. So that is the spontaneous mode. Then there's a time mode. Time mode is where there's no relation to the patient. It's time triggered and time cycled. At fixed interval, the BiPAP is going to deliver the breath, the pressure, and at fixed cycle, at fixed time, the BiPAP is going to stop the pressure and allow the patient to expire. So there, no patient effort is required. But this, what is the problem here is that as entire work of breathing is performed by the ventilator, if the patient tries to breathe in between, the BiPAP doesn't sense it. When it doesn't sense it, it creates an asynchrony between the patient and the BiPAP machine. And that is the reason they start fighting the BiPAP or the ventilator, which we are going to give to the patient. The best mode, which is the newer mode, is the ST mode, which is spontaneous timed mode. So it is a combination of both. So by combining both the modes, what do we mean is that when the patient is breathing on its own, the BiPAP will work on a spontaneous mode, where the breath will be initiated by the patient, breath will be completed by the patient. By any chance, if the patient stops breathing in between for a certain period of time, then the BiPAP switches to time mode and it starts to deliver the breath in a time controlled fashion. So we always ask whenever we prescribe the BiPAP, especially when you're giving it at home, that what mode are the BiPAP machine offering? Is it only spontaneous mode, or there is a ST mode which is there? If it is a ST mode which is there, we should always give the ST mode, where we can give a backup rate to the patient. Now coming to the interface. So the interface, as we see here, there are multiple interfaces which are used. First, which is most commonly seen everywhere, this is called the oronasal interface, which covers the nose and it covers the face, basically the mouth. Then comes the nasal interface, which will only cover the nose. It will not cover your face. Then there's something which is known as nasal pillows, which will only go into your nostrils, whereas everything else will be open. Then there's a total face mask, which is covering the whole face. Mouthpiece is very rarely used. And then there's a helmet mask. This helmet mask was a lot in discussion during COVID times, because as you see, it covers everything around. So there's less chances of air to go out and less chances of any viral spread which can happen through the helmet mask. So the advantages and disadvantages of each we'll see. First is the nasal mask. As we know, nasal mask is not covering our mouth. It is only covering our nose. Hence, there is less risk of aspiration because whatever comes in our mouth, we can spit it out. Even if we vomit, that vomiting is going to go out through the mouth and it is not going to go back in because there is no mask which is covering the mouth. Hence, there is easier secretion clearance. There is less claustrophobia because your mouth is at least open. You can talk, so speech is intact and it's easy to fit and secure. What is the disadvantage? As it is only covering the nose, when your mouth is open, when you start breathing through mouth when you're sleeping, there's leak of air through the mouth. Okay, because it is only covering the nose and you're giving a higher pressure, there will be a lot of resistance which your nasal cavity will offer. Less effective if there is nasal obstruction, and it causes nasal irritation. It can cause rhinorrhea, and it has trigger and cycle issues. Now, oronasal, which is most common, what we see here, oronasal, there is increased risk of aspiration as our mouth is covered. So by any chance, if the patient vomits or he tries to spit, that remains in the mask and he can aspirate that. There is difficulty speaking. You cannot eat unless and until you remove this. You cannot clear your secretions unless and until you remove the mask. Chances of asphyxiations are there, and a lot of skin ulceration, especially at the bridge of the nose, at the angle of your jaw and mouth is seen. What is the advantage is that it is better mouth leak control because your mouth is covered. There's less chances of any leaking which can happen through the mouth. It is more effective in mouth breathers. Total face mask is of course more comfortable because it is covering your whole face. So less amount of pressure is going to be applied at your nose and your angle jaw. It is easier to fit, less facial skin and breakdown. And the disadvantage is that you cannot deliver any aerosolized medications. Like if you want to give a nebulization, you cannot attach in the circuit because it will go and diffuse all over your face. It will not go into your nose or your mouth where it is intended to go. It can cause claustrophobia and there is risk of aspiration. Now, helmet mask, better tolerable as we know. It has less air leak. That is the reason it was being used in COVID in a lot of centers because the air leak was less. There's no facial skin lesions and it is independent of patient's anatomy. Even if your face is burnt, there is facial injury, you can still give a helmet mask because it doesn't come in any way close to the face. There are the disadvantages that it causes rebreathing. There is poor patient ventilator asynchrony because it covers your ear also. Hearing loss can happen and it cannot deliver aerosolized medications. Okay. So generally, if you're giving in acute setting, oronasal mask is preferred than the nasal mask. Ideally, it is equally effective, but generally oronasal mask is preferred because you can deliver higher pressures via oronasal mask. If you try to give a higher pressure in a nasal mask because of the nasal insufflation and the nasal tract being narrow, the patient can feel uncomfortable with it. Then total face mask is equivalent to oronasal mask. Oronasal mask is always the first choice. In chronic care, if you're giving a BiPAP machine to be taken at home, you have to provide him with all sorts of different interface and ask the patient to try each and find which suits him the best. Generally, we try oronasal or nasal. Generally, chronic care patients will be more comfortable with a nasal mask because they can use it, they can talk, they can eat while wearing that BiPAP machine and it doesn't hinder their daily activity. So standard nasal masks are commonly used. Now, to establish the need for ventilation before initiating NIV, we have to have an appropriate diagnosis with potential reversibility and effectiveness of NIV. Appropriate diagnosis, we mean the indications which we saw, either a cardiogenic pulmonary edema, patients in COPD exacerbations, immunocompromised patients, or weaning of COPD patients. These are the main 4 places where we are going to use. Patients who have respiratory distress, have tachypnea, for those 4 indications, have using their accessory muscles of respiration. And this is very important. Your pH in blood gas has to be less than 7.35 and PCO2 has to be more than 45. If your pH is say 7.38, 7.36, the patient does not require BiPAP. The patient can be managed on pure oxygen and the pH might improve on its own. Unless and until along with that, the patient also has any of these three: respiratory distress, tachypnea, or accessory muscle use. So for starting the NIV, how we saw, choose the correct interface. In acute setting, generally give a oronasal mask. Explain the therapy to the patient, because we are putting something which is going to give a positive pressure inside the patient. So if we don't explain what is going to happen to the patient will never accept that NIV. So ideally, what is the correct way is that you don't tie the NIV immediately. You first take it in your hand, keep it a little far away from the patient, and explain that this is the kind of pressure that the patient is going to receive. And you have to breathe in and breathe out in sync with the ventilator, and gradually this will benefit you and it will improve your condition. So you set the NIV portable pressure ventilator in spontaneous or spontaneous time mode. ST mode is preferred over a spontaneous mode. Start with very low settings, because if you immediately start, say, with a high pressure, like the inspiratory pressure, you start giving 18 and expiratory pressure, you start giving 10, the pressure is so high that the patient is not going to tolerate. So generally you start with a low pressure and gradually by 2 centimeter keep increasing the pressure till the patient is able to tolerate. So start with a low positive pressure, the inspiratory pressure around 6 to 8 centimeter and expiratory pressure between 2 to 4 centimeter. The difference should always be at least 4 centimeters for a BiPAP. Okay. And you can start the oxygen at 2 liters per minute along with the BiPAP. If you're giving via ventilator BiPAP, you can start at 40% FiO2 and gradually increase the FiO2 depending on the SpO2 on the monitor. Like I said, hold the mask with a hand over his face. Do not fix it immediately. Now increase the expiratory pressure gradually and gradually increase the inspiratory pressure. We started at 2 to 4, gradually go to 6, gradually go to 8. Now what we need to know, what we have not given here, is what is the role of expiratory pressure and what is the role of inspiratory pressure. So any patient, as we have seen before, the difference has to be minimum of 4. Now, if we want the patient to have a higher tidal volume, we want more carbon dioxide to be washed out, we have to increase this difference. With the difference between the inspiratory and expiratory pressure, which is 4 centimeter, it has to go to 6 centimeter or 8 centimeter. So the difference has to increase. It is not the expiratory pressure which has to increase, it is the inspiratory pressure which has to increase. So say if we have started at 10 and 4 or 10 and 6, inspiratory pressure being 10 and expiratory pressure being 6. Now we see that the patient is retaining carbon dioxide. We don't increase the expiratory pressure. 6 is okay for him. We increase the inspiratory pressure from 10 to 12 or 14. The difference in the inspiratory and the expiratory pressure is going to give us the tidal volume. And when we increase the tidal volume, more carbon dioxide is going to be washed out. Now, when do we increase the expiratory pressure? Expiratory pressure is what? As we know, EPAP is end expiratory pressure. That is the pressure which is going to remain in your alveoli at the end of expiration. That is the pressure that is going to keep your alveoli open at the end of expiration. So this is the pressure which is required to increase your oxygenation. So if a patient on BiPAP is hypoxic, saturation is 90, 88, 87, you are giving 10-15 liters of oxygen, you are still not able to bring up the oxygen. That is the time you think of increasing the expiratory pressure. When you increase the expiratory pressure, as the alveoli remain open, more oxygen can go in and the oxygenation can improve. So when we have a problem of hypoxia, we increase the expiratory pressure. When we have a problem of hypercapnia, we increase the difference between the inspiratory and the expiratory pressure. Then when all the patient's efforts are triggering with the ventilator, we keep the EPAP at that level and we start increasing the inspiratory pressure by increments of 1 to 2 centimeter up to a maximum pressure. Generally, a maximum pressure is considered between 18 to 20 centimeters of bottom, which the patient can tolerate without discomfort, and there is no major mouth or air leaks. Now we secure the interface with head straps. So till then we have to hold the BiPAP mask with our hand and gradually improve the patient compliance, and then secure the interface with tightness to prevent any air leak. Now, after titrating the pressure, we can now increase the oxygen to bring the oxygen saturation around 90%. As the settings may be different in wakeful and sleep patients, we adjust them accordingly. So our goal is basically to relieve dyspnea, optimize patient comfort, reduce the work of breathing, improve the gas exchange, minimize the complications, avoid intubation, and avoid a delay of needed intubation. What do you mean by avoid delay of needed intubation? Sometimes what happens is that we overzealously use the NIV for a long time, thinking that patient might not require intubation. But in the end, say after 24 or 48 hours, we have to put the patient back on ventilator with a mechanical ventilation. So that golden period where we could have ventilated the patient and improved his saturation and improved his gas exchange, which was not happening with non-invasive ventilation, that golden period is lost. So we have to know when should we stop using NIV and when should we switch to mechanical ventilators and not continuously use NIV in a hope that the patient is going to get better. Similarly, for long-term applications, it is to ameliorate the symptoms, improve or stabilize the gas exchange, improve sleep duration and quality, maximize quality of life, enhance functional status, and prolong the survival. So monitoring, it can be in three forms. First is subjective. You have to see after putting the NIV whether his patient is comfortable, whatever dyspnea he had, respiratory distress he had, whether that is being relieved or not. Then you see the chest wall movements. Are they moving in sync with the pressure the NIV is giving? Generally, these patients who are in respiratory distress will have tachycardia. Is that tachycardia being settled? Is the respiratory rate coming down? Is the sensorium of the patient improving? And is there a synchrony between the patient's breath and the breath which the non-invasive ventilator is giving? That is the physiological monitoring. And gas exchange monitoring depends on the oxygen saturation and the arterial blood gases. So it is recommended that during the first 12 hours, patient should have a continuous pulse oximetry and cardiac monitoring. This is an acute setting. Hourly recording of respiratory rate and heart rate should be done. Assessment of clinical level of consciousness, chest wall movements, use of accessory muscles should be performed at regular intervals and charted in a proforma. Frequent clinical monitoring of acutely ill patient is recommended every 15 minutes in the first hour. So when you put the patient on NIV, every 15 minutes for the first hour, you have to check the things which we saw here. Patient's comfort, dyspnea relief, chest wall movements, respiratory rate, sensorium, everything. Arterial blood gases and everything don't need to be done at 15 minutes interval. It's only the clinical signs which we have to see at 15 minutes interval. And during the first 4 hours, from 1 to 4 hours, every 30 minutes, it has to be checked. And now when do we do a ABG? So as soon as we put the patient on BiPAP, before we are putting the patient on BiPAP, we have done an ABG and we have proven that this patient requires BiPAP for the excessive carbon dioxide or for the hypoxemia, for whatever reason we are going to give him the BiPAP. So whatever reason we have started in the BiPAP at 1 hour, 4 hour and 12 hours interval. After starting the BiPAP, we have to do the ABG. Or at any point of time when we change the setting, say we are giving 14.6 pressure and we change it to say 18.10. Whenever we change the settings, after 1 hour of changing the settings, we repeat a ABG. And any time in between when we feel that the patient requires it. And any time when we are doing it at the first hour, 4th hour or 12th hour, if your ABG is deteriorating from your previous ABG or ABG is not improving or the patient is not improving the way you want to see him improve on NIV or you expected, you don't wait, you start the process for mechanical ventilation and intubation. So what are the determinants of success for non-invasive ventilation? Synchronous breathing for the ventilator. The dentation should be intact. There should be good initial response to the non-invasive ventilation. That is the first hour NIV, ABG should show improvement from what the ABG was before starting the non-invasive ventilation. And there should be reduction in respiratory rate, reduction in PaCO2. There should be pH should be more than 7.1, PaCO2 should be less than 92, should have a better neurological control score and a better compliance. So the NIV failure, now what we need to know, as I said, pH less than 7.35, you start NIV. But if your pH is less than 7.25, be very, very careful of starting NIV. Generally, these patients don't improve with non-invasive ventilation. These patients will require invasive ventilation to better their respiratory compliance and the gas exchange. So if your acidosis with pH of less than 7.25, its chances are that NIV is going to fail. If PCO2 is more than 80, especially patients who are not COPD, chances are that the NIV is going to fail. If patient is not conscious, GCS is less than 8, NIV will fail, and failure of improvement of NIV in the first 24 hours. The ABG which we are doing, first hour, 4th hour and 12th hour, it is not showing any improvement. That are predictors for NIV failure. So to summarize it, in any patients with type 2 respiratory failure, generally when we initiate the NIV, if pH is between 7.35 to 7.45, we do a conventional treatment with controlled oxygenation, nebulized bronchodilators, antibiotics, corticosteroids, diuretics for heart failure, and we continue the monitoring. If pH is between 7.25 to 7.35, we consider non-invasive ventilation with a close watch of repeat ABG to see whether patient is improving or not in the first 4 to 12 hours. And if pH is less than 7.25 with a reduced GCS, no improvement in ABG initially, or you have a hemodynamically unstable patient, you straight away consider intubation. Unless and until the patient has given us a do not intubate or do not resuscitate consent, where we give NIV and hope that the patient improves. So this is the basic of what the non-invasive ventilation monitoring and initiation should be. Thank you.